I'd like to go to Senator Santorum with a similar topic. We're in a state where it is legal for same-sex couples to marry. 1,800, in fact, couples have married since it became law here in New Hampshire. The legislature passed it a couple of years ago, and they're trying to start families, some of them. Your position on same-sex adoption, obviously you are in favor of traditional families, but are you going to tell someone that they belong as a ward of the state or in foster care rather than have two parents who want them?
Well, this isn't a federal issue, it's a state issue, number one. The states can make that determination. In New Hampshire, my feeling is that this is an issue that should be done. I believe the issue of marriage itself is a federal issue, that we can't have different laws with respect to marriage. We have to have one law. Marriage is, as Newt said, a foundational institution of our country, and we have to have a singular law with respect to that. We can't have somebody married in one state and not married in another. If we were successful in establishing that, then this issue becomes moot. If we don't have a federal law, I'm certainly not going to have a federal law that bans adoption for gay couples when there are only gay couples in certain states. So this is a state issue, not a federal issue.
Well, let me ask you to follow up on that, if you don't mind, Senator. With those 1,800, if we have a federal constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage, what happens to the 1,800 families who have married here? Are their marriages basically illegitimate at this point?
If we have a constitution, if the Constitution says marriage is between a man and a woman, then marriage is between a man and a woman. And therefore, that's what marriage is and would be in this country. And those who are not men and women who are married would not be married. That's what the Constitution would say.
If I could come back to the living room question again, Governor Romney, would you weigh in on the Yahoo question about what you would say sitting down in your living room to a gay couple who say, we simply want to have the right to, as the person who wrote the email said, we want gay people to form loving, committed, long-term relations. It's in human terms, what would you say to them?
Well, the answer is that that's a wonderful thing to do, and that there's every right for people in this country to form long-term, committed relationships with one another. That doesn't mean that they have to call it marriage, or they have to receive the approval of the state and a marriage license and so forth for that to occur. There can be domestic partnership benefits or a contractual relationship between two people, which would include, as Speaker Gingrich indicated, hospital visitation rights and the like. We can decide what kinds of benefits we might associate with people who form those kind of relationships, state by state. But to say that marriage is something other than the relationship between a man and a woman, I think is a mistake. And the reason for that is not that we want to discriminate against people or to suggest that gay couples are not just as loving and can't also raise children well, but it's instead a recognition that for society as a whole, the nation presumably will be better off if children are raised in a setting where there's a male and a female. And there are many cases where that's not possible: divorce, death, single parents, gay parents, and so forth. But for a society to say we want to encourage, through the benefits that we associate with marriage, people to form partnerships between men and women and then raise children, which we think that will be the ideal setting for them to be raised.
Speaker Gingrich has to weigh in.
I just want to raise, since we spent this much time on these issues, I just want to raise a point about the news media bias. You don't hear the opposite question asked. Should the Catholic Church be forced to close its adoption services in Massachusetts because it won't accept gay couples, which is exactly what the state has done? Should the Catholic Church be driven out of providing charitable services in the District of Columbia because it won't give in to secular bigotry? Should the Catholic Church find itself discriminated against by the Obama administration on key delivery of services because of the bias and the bigotry of the administration? The bigotry question goes both ways, and there's a lot more anti-Christian bigotry today than there is concern on the other side, and none of it gets covered by the news media.
As you can tell, the people in this room feel that Speaker Gingrich is absolutely right, and I do too. And I was in a state where the Supreme Court stepped in and said marriage is a relationship required under the Constitution for people of the same sex to be able to marry. And John Adams, who wrote the Constitution, would be surprised. And it did exactly as Speaker Gingrich indicated. What happened was Catholic Charities, that placed almost half of all the adoptive children in our state, was forced to step out of being able to provide adoptive services. And the state tried to find other places to help children. We have to recognize that this decision about what we call marriage has consequence which goes far beyond a loving couple wanting to form a long-term relationship. That they can do within the law now. Calling it marriage creates a whole host of problems for families, for the law, for the practice of religion, for education. Let me say this: 3,000 years of human history shouldn't be discarded so quickly.
Governor Paul, Congressman Paul, let me bring this to you. You're running here in the Republican primary, but you haven't promised to support the party's nominee in November, and you refuse to rule out running as a third-party candidate if you fail to get the nomination. Why not rule that out?
Well, I essentially have. It's just that I don't like absolutes, like I will never do something. But no.
Never vote for a debt ceiling.
Please don't interrupt me.
Just
So I have said it in the last go-around. I said they asked me that about 30 times. I think maybe you've asked me 4 or 5 already. And the answer is always the same. No, I have no plans to do it. I don't intend to do it. And somebody pushed me a little bit harder. And I said, why don't you plan to do it? I says, I don't want to. So I have no intention. But I don't know why a person can't reserve a judgment and see how things turn out. In many ways, I see the other candidates as very honorable people, but I sometimes disagree with their approach to government, and I'd like to see some changes. I want to see changes where they're talking about a little bit of a difference in foreign policy, an interest in the Federal Reserve, a change in the monetary policy. We haven't heard one minute of talk about cutting any spending. Just talked previously about cutting the military spending. That's cutting proposed increases. This is why I have proposed that we cut a whole $1 trillion the first year. If we're serious as Republicans and conservatives, we have to cut. So I want to put as much pressure on them as I can. But besides, I'm doing pretty well. Third wasn't too bad. I wasn't too far behind it. Doing pretty well. Catching up on Mitt every single day.
Governor Perry, do you think everyone on this stage should rule out third-party candidacies?
I think anyone on the stage is better than what we've got in place. And let me just address this issue of gay marriage just very quickly. And it's a bigger issue, frankly. I am for a constitutional amendment that says that marriage is between a man and a woman at the federal level. But this administration's war on religion is what bothers me greatly. When we see an administration that will not defend the Defense of Marriage Act, that gives their Justice Department clear instructions to go take the ministerial exception away from our churches where that's never happened before, when we see this administration not giving money to Catholic charities for sexually trafficked individuals because they don't agree with the Catholic Church on abortion, that is a war against religion, and it's going to stop under a Perry administration.
I would like to turn now, if I can, back to foreign policy. And Governor Huntsman, Afghanistan, 90,000 troops tonight, and we salute them all serving in Afghanistan. What is the earliest you think they should be brought home?
We've been at the war on terror for 10 years now. We've been in Afghanistan. And I say we've got a lot to show for our efforts, and I, as president, would like to square with the American people on what we have to show for it. The Taliban is no longer in power. We've run out al-Qaeda. They're now in sanctuaries. We've had free elections. Osama bin Laden is no longer around. We have strengthened civil society. We've helped the military. We've helped the police. I believe it's time to come home. And I would say within the first year of my administration, which is to say at the end of 2013, I would want to draw them down. And I want to recognize Afghanistan for what it is. It is not a counterinsurgency. I don't want to be nation building in Southwest Asia when this nation is in such need of repair. But we do have a counterterror mission in Southwest Asia. And that would suppose leaving behind maybe 10,000 troops for intelligence gathering, for special forces rapid response capability and training.
Governor Romney, time to come home?
Well, we want to bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can. And Governor Huntsman says the end of 2013. The president and the commanders are saying they think 2014 is a better date. We'll get a chance to see what happens over the coming year. We want to bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can. And I will, if I'm president, I will inform myself based upon the experience of the people on the ground that are leading our effort there. I want to make sure that we hand off the responsibility to an Afghan security force that is capable of maintaining the sovereignty of their nation from the Taliban. But I can tell you this: I don't want to do something that would put in jeopardy much of the hard-earned success which we've had there, and I would bring our troops home as soon as we possibly can. Of course, based upon my own experience there, going there, informing myself of what's happening there, and listening to the commanders on the ground.
Governor Huntsman, you have a disagreement.
Yeah, I would have to admit that the President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief. Of course, you get input and advice from a lot of different corners of Washington, including the commanders on the ground. But we also deferred to the commanders on the ground at about 1967 during the Vietnam War, and we didn't get very good advice then. Here's what I think is around the corner in Afghanistan. I think civil war is around the corner in Afghanistan. And I don't want to be the president who invests another penny in a civil war. And I don't want to be the president who sends another man or woman to harm's way that we're not able to bring back alive. I say we've got something to show for our mission. Let's recognize that and let's move on.
Speaker Garrett, do you have any quarrel with that?
Well, I think we're asking the wrong questions. Afghanistan is a tiny piece of a gigantic mess that is very dangerous. Pakistan is unstable, and they probably have between 1 and 200 nuclear weapons. Iran is actively trying to get nuclear weapons. I mean, they go out and practice closing the Straits of Hormuz, where 1 out of every 6 barrels of oil goes through every day. And if they close the Straits of Hormuz, you have an industrial depression across the planet within 48 hours. You have the Muslim Brotherhood winning the elections in Egypt. The truth is we don't know who's in charge in Libya. You have a region-wide crisis, which we have been mismanaging and underestimating, which is not primarily a military problem. We're not going to go in and solve Pakistan militarily. We're not going to go in and solve all these other things. Look at the rate at which Iraq is decaying. I mean, they began decaying within 24 hours of our last troops leaving. And I think we need a fundamentally new strategy for the region comparable to what we developed to fight the Cold War. And I think it's a very big, hard, long-term problem, but it's not primarily a military